Great. All right. Well, welcome to Bother the Father. First off, a program note. We'll meet next week at 6:30. Next week at 6:30. Sorry, on Tuesday, and then the week after, I believe, is the.
What's today, the 12th?
Today's the 12th, so the 26th.
26th.
The 26th usually. So now we're reserving that for Monsignor has a Bible study on the last Tuesday of the month, but he's on vacation this month, so we'll do Friends, Food, and Faith that day at 7. Actually, we can do it at 6:30 since it's not in line with the benediction. And then the week after, we'll stop. We'll take a hiatus from this, and then they'll have the Bible study when Monsignor comes back. So we're kind of just switching those days. The first Tuesday in August with the last Tuesday in July, Bother the Father and the Bible study. So next week we'll be Bother the Father. The week after we'll have Friends, Food, and Faith
At 6:30.
at 6:30, and the week after we'll have they'll have the Bible study with Monsignor, and then we'll go back to the Bother the Father schedule. And there shouldn't be other disruptions other than that. If there is, we'll let everyone know. But that's the plan going forward. So again, next week we'll meet for Bother the Father. The week after we'll have Friends, Food, and Faith at 6:30, and then the week after that they'll have Bible study, and then we'll go back to Bother the Father. So just throw it out there, make sure everyone's aware of the schedule going forward, and then we'll make sure we actually have availability for the places we want to have. We'll go from there. Well, great. We only have one person here, but that's great. So any questions or anything you want to discuss?
You always have a cross on the altar for Mass. Is that like mandatory, or is that just something that is, it's kind of like, it should be there?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe it's just best to say it's fitting that we have one there. Yeah, it's funny. Back last week on Totus Tuus, I gave a tour for the first and second graders of the church. I did this with the seventh graders too, throughout in the year during the school year. And I always ask this question: okay, well, we have this beautiful building which we call church, it's St. Gabriel Catholic Church. And so I asked the kids, what makes this a Catholic church, right? And you just say, oh, us. So it's like, well, okay, yeah, the church is made up of people, that's true. But if you were to leave here, would this still be a church? Well, yeah. Okay. Well, the priest, well, okay, but I'm not here all the time, so right. So I'm trying to really in directions like this. There's certain things in this building that need to be there for it to be a Catholic church. And so, curiosity, do you have any idea what those may be?
Have to be there in order to be a Catholic church. Well, for sure the sanctuary,
the sanctuary spaces were everything that where we basically have the liturgy, right? So that there's the nave, where everyone sits.
Right.
Then there's the sanctuary space, which is really kind of another type of heaven, right? So that's where these heavenly ministries happen. And so there's sort of like a set apart, it's consecrated, set apart from the rest of the world, really. And so yeah, we need a sanctuary, but there's actually 3 particular things in the sanctuary that we need to be actually.
Jesus on the cross.
That is a great thought, but no, we don't. Yeah, it's interesting. You think about Catholic
church. I can't remember that.
And they all do. I mean, most. I mean, I shouldn't say all, but most of them do.
Yeah.
But I always like walk them through the Mass and say, okay, let's look at the Mass. Like, what's the first thing we do? What's the first thing that happens at Mass? It's like, well, okay, where's the priest go, right?
He genuflects, then he goes around the altar, and
so the altar. We need an altar, right? That's key. We need the altar to have the sacrifice of the Mass. We need the altar for sure.
Well, now, what is the definition of an altar? Can it be a table of some kind?
Yeah, so that's interesting because the proper definition of an altar is a consecrated table, for lack of a better word, that's only used for that particular thing, right? So what I point out to the kids is like, this is something that this altar, we don't use this for like our dinner, right? We don't come around the table and actually have conversations. This is actually only used for one particular purpose. Now, if I were to have, let's say we have Mass in the grass.
Yeah, right? Or Mass in someone's home.
Or Mass in someone's home.
Right.
Can we use any table? Yeah, we could. There's certain things that we do differently. So for instance, if I were to, let's say, celebrate mass at my sister's house for like Thanksgiving or something, right? And we had like a card table, okay? I wouldn't venerate the card table, right? Because it's a card table. Now, based on the circumstances, you may ask people, well, then why even have mass at your sister's house, right? Shouldn't they be in church? Well, yeah. But there are certain, when we have like a private mass, for instance, I have a private mass, like I have at my desk. Sure, I could. Do I venerate my desk? No, because that's not consecrated, right? That's something different. But we need something like an altar, right? And so even if we put an altar cloth down and kind of use a card table, that becomes what we call temporary altar, but it's not consecrated for that particular thing, right? An altar is consecrated for that. You would not use that for anything else other than the sacrifice of mass. In the same way, the other things we need maybe would also kind of reflect that in many ways too. So after the priest venerates the altar, where does the priest then go after that?
Well, he goes to not the podium, but to say the entrance down.
Yeah, the chair.
The chair.
Yeah, so the presider's chair, right? Again, the same way, the presider's chair is consecrated for that particular action. It's set apart from other chairs, right? The presider, so it's called the presider's chair because this is really the chair where the presider of a particular liturgy would sit. It's kind of the seat of authority, for in some way, the presidential chair, right? So does it have to be a clergy to sit in that chair?
No, and a deacon, of course.
Well, in the mass, it would have to be a priest, right, or a bishop. But like liturgy hours. So does a clergy have to lead liturgy hours?
No.
No. So could the lay person who's leading the liturgy hours sit in the presider's chair? Yeah.
Really?
If they're leading, sure, they're presiding at that particular liturgy, so sure, right? But yeah, that's different. Like one of these chairs that we sit. Now, again, though, if we were having a temporary setup, whatever, yeah, any chair we do, as long as you have that chair, right? But that particular chair is consecrated. What happens after the collect?
Goes back to the altar. No.
Well, so after the collect, we all sit down and then.
Well, if it's a Sunday, there's Gloria,
Well, yeah, this so we say the collect, amen, we all sit down, and then what happens after that? I know you know this. Because you often come up to do this. Yeah, because you often come up and do this very, very often.
Oh. So then somebody comes in the reading?
Yeah, pray the word, right? So we have now in our church we have what we properly call the ambo. Right.
Right.
The ambo is stationary. It also is consecrated, set apart. But you could use a podium. That's okay too, right? To use a podium is mobile, while ambo is stationary. And ambo is supposed to reflect the tomb of Christ. That the people, especially the priest or deacon who proclaims the gospel, especially from the ambo, is like the angel proclaiming the good news of the resurrection, right? That's the symbolic nature of it. In a lot of ways, the altar also represents the tomb. That's why we venerate it. We're kissing the tomb of Christ, right? Those are the only three things you need. Everything else is good, right? It kind of raises our devotion, right? It raises our minds and hearts to deeper worship. The tabernacle, most Catholic Church have tabernacles, but you don't necessarily need a tabernacle. If you consecrate just as much you need at that mass, and then you consume the rest, okay? There's no need for the tabernacle. But those are the only three things. So an altar cross that we have on the altar, usually most people have a big crucifix to look at, right? Well, the problem doing the pro populum mass, meaning the priest is facing the people, is the priest can't see that. And so he has a cross that he can also venerate and reflect on while the mass is going on, especially at the highest part of the mass, which is the consecration. So yeah, so that's really a good thing to have, so the priest can also focus their direction on what's happening too.
Now, the sanctuary, I mean, I guess there's, the light has to be on if there's. the
Jesus in the
tabernacle.
tabernacle,
Yeah. I mean, almost all Catholic churches seem to have.
yeah.
the-
I mean,
So
so,
I guess they always have extra hoses that are.
right, I mean, the only place you probably wouldn't see that as much would be maybe like a chapel. So like, for instance, St. Mary and Joe's Church over on Minnesota, in South City, right? That's no longer a parish church, it's more of a chapel. I don't believe the Blessed Sacrament is kept there at all times. When I was living there, because I was their priest, we did, but now there's not a priest living there, so no. But they would have funerals and weddings, right? And so if they were to use the tabernacle, they would surely have to light that lamp when Jesus was put in the tabernacle, or really should light it at the consecration. Because what that shows is Jesus is present in the sanctuary, right? Called the sanctuary lamp. But again, these are all good things to have. The same with the altar cross. It's not necessary, but it's good, right? It kind of helps direct our attention, our minds, and hearts, what's going on. Yeah, it's kind of weird to think about that, like from as a Catholic perspective, that the tabernacle is not necessary. and really, it makes sense in the long run, because like when you think about like in the ancient church, where mass were celebrated at homes or celebrated at crypts, well, the thing is, all the blood sacrament was distributed, right? And anything left over, deacons would take to be homebound or whatever, or be fully consumed, right? So you didn't just like have tabernacles and sanctuary lamps and everything for the first few hundred years of the Catholic Church, right? But as churches were established and built, and there's more people coming, that the church got bigger, you didn't really necessarily know how many people were coming on Sunday. You have to have someplace to put Jesus instead of just consuming Jesus completely, which could take forever. And
So when did it come about approximately?
Well, it probably happened shortly after the Edict of Milan. So once the first church, there's several churches out throughout, maybe in the Middle East and stuff that were kind of there, but the worship itself was kind of more done at crypts or done in people's houses. But after about 325, 315, right, right around the Council of Nicaea, we're now constantly started actually building churches and reconsecrating other pagan temples to become Christian churches. That's where we probably saw more of the development of tabernacles and these type of accoutrement in particular churches. So good. Yeah, no, it's yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I never really saw that growing up, where they had like an altar, the priest would have a cross on the altar for themselves. And you wouldn't really see it up until probably after Vatican II, because, well, when the priest was celebrating ad orientem, meaning his back was for the people, well, he was facing the same thing the people were.
Right.
So he was facing Jesus, but when in the Pro Populum came about, it was sort of like, well, unless you had a crucifix somewhere else in the nave or in the sanctuary, it kind of makes sense you would have one for the priest himself or for the ministers that are there too. So yeah, not necessary, but it's really good devotion.
Very appropriate.
That's what they would be fitting to have it there. Okay, wow. Just got anything else? I don't know. We can call it night. Be a short one tonight.
Well,
Yeah, I think most people are kind of scandalized by that when they say it's like, yeah, we actually don't need a tabernacle. It's like, well, I mean, I just have to put that perspective. Like, I mean, it's good to have one just in case. Like, if I consecrate 400 hosts and only 30 people show up, well, okay, yeah, I'm not going to, consume 370 hosts. But otherwise, yeah, no, I mean, you could also.
Does it have to be made out of any specific kind of material? Or?
The tabernacle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it should be in the same way that we have the sacred vessels made out of particular materials. Whatever Jesus could potentially touch should be precious. So gold, silver, right? Platinum, maybe you can make an argument, although platinum is pretty rare. That would be probably fiduciarily a good idea. In the Catholic Church, in the Church of the United States, stone could be used, or a very hard wood has been allowed. Right. So if I had a chalice that was made out of very, very hard, let's say oak or something, right, that would be okay, according to USCCB. Stone actually, basically will make sure it doesn't shatter or break, or that this bus sacrament won't go everywhere. So the same thing would apply for the tabernacle, right? So it has to be made of some kind of sturdy material that would consider to be precious in some ways, right? So yeah, I mean, it's funny that the US, I think there's different standards, different places. I think here because, I guess because when the United States was founded, wood was so abundant here, it made sense. Whereas if you went to like, I don't know if that'd be allowed like in Europe. I think Europe would be either silver or gold or some other, maybe stone for that too. So it's just kind of, that's always kind of focused around the tradition of how the places were developed particularly. But it always has to be something sturdy. Like you never see a tabernacle or even a chalice or anything made out of like crystal or glass. The crystal is kind of, or even diamond for that matter, I guess. I don't know. But though we consider very precious, it could potentially shatter. So that's some interesting discussion on that. Okay.
And the chalices that the priest has, they also are made out of something precious like gold or silver.
Typically, yeah. Like so, like I have 2 chalices. One I use for Sundays and Sundays. It was given to me by a good friend, a priest. And the other one my family bought, or actually my home parish bought me. And one is sterling silver that's plated in gold, right? And the other one is actually olive wood, but it has at least a plated gold cup, right? So olive wood probably is very soft, so that probably would not suffice in the United States, which is why it has the gold cup. But the olive wood is really, it came from Jerusalem, it was made there, and so, whatever. But yeah, primarily it's either silver or gold for the chalice, or at least the cup would have to be.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, some get pretty, a lot of are handed down from generation to generation. But you could buy them straight out. I mean, some are very ornate, some are, everyone has theirs appraised for insurance reasons. Just make sure that it gets lost or stolen, that whatever. Or insured. But yeah, so I think like Monsignor Simons, I think Monsignor Schindler are both sterling silver. Right. So it's always gonna be something like that. And it doesn't necessarily, so you could also like do like plastic and then put like a gold coating over it, right? That would suffice. But the problem with plating is eventually it rubs away and it's not very
Scratch it in it.
right. Yeah. So there's always better and worse. Like so like even and a lot of this is reflected in the price. So like the communion chalice we used to use, those are a little cheaper because they're probably more like brass. They're just like coated, right? So they're not necessarily like, but like usually the priest chalice is like a sturdy, actually completely silver or gold. And so they're much more pricey. And that's usually sometimes, that's sometimes a big critique of the Catholic Church. It's sort of like, well, you spend all this money on these items, where if you just like, maybe give that money to charity and stuff. And it's like, well, and there's a certain point, but you have to understand too that again, just like the altar and the chair consecrated, they're set apart. So are these things. Like I'm not drinking water and out of my chalice every night, or beer or anything else out of that for that matter. That's only used for one particular thing, and it's touching the most precious thing in the entire universe. So it makes sense that you would dedicate something like that to that particular purpose. But even so, even if we were to add up everything, let's say that every priest and every bishop and every cardinal took everything they had and donated to charity, or gave it all away to the poor homeless. It would still only maybe feed half the population of the world for maybe a year, right? And so we're talking, I mean, that's the thing about it. First off, it shows how well we're doing as a society here in the United States as far as our wealth. But also, it's a straw man argument as when it comes to like these things, because the other thing is like even these other things like the altar pieces and these other statuary and other things we have, that's all directed for a particular purpose, right? It's meant to kind of elevate us. Beauty is something that we want to experience. And this helps us do that. And so, but even if we did give them all away, it wouldn't even make a dent.
Yeah.
Right. So it's always an interesting argument, especially from some of our Protestant friends, because they tend to have more simple worship spaces, which is fine. But even within there, you can make an argument, well, you guys have like, a lot of wood and a lot of, stained glass, and you have a lot of, stone masonry work, and that's pretty expensive. Why not? I mean, if we're gonna make the argument, why don't you go out in the woods? Worship out there. So yeah, it's always kind of an interesting discussion when it comes to those things. And some denominations may just do that. And they say, yeah, you're right, let's just go do that. Yeah. I mean, because their understanding of worship and liturgy is just much different than ours. All they really need is the word. Great. And people, great. And so do we. But we have particular, we actually understand the visible church in a different way. That God does work through things. He actually works through these symbols and signs that we can actually experience, right? So the word is, of course, is not something to be diminished. We also cherish that too, but we also understand that God works through these things. So it's good to have them. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion, and I always find that kind of amusing when that's ever brought up. It's like, well, if you guys sold all the Vatican property and all that. Oh yeah, okay. Well then, you're right. It would feed certain few people for a while, but then what?
The poor and the hungry are always going to be with you.
Yeah, I think I heard that somewhere, right? There's that. I think it was Good People magazine. I don't know. Follow that, Interesting stuff.
So the mass could be said in languages that are familiar, that the people of the culture have. In other words, if Polish people have their language, and so the mass is said in Polish.
Yeah, so there's allowance.
Yeah.
So yes. So we'll be very clear. When the Doctrines of Vatican II came out, the authoritative document is called Sacrosanctum Concilium. So, well, that means it's just the first words of the document. Says this sacred council. Sorry, so that's all really. But there was allowance to have the mass in vernacular. So particularly for the Latin Rite. So we want to make very clear distinctions. We have Eastern Rite churches that are part of the Catholic Church. That every Orthodox church is out there. There's actually a companion Catholic church that celebrates what they call divine worship in their particular dialect. So, for instance, the Chaldean church in Iraq, right? They celebrate the Mass in Aramaic, the original language of Jesus, right? That's been that tradition there for millennia, right? And so there's really no good reason to change that. Now if the Synod of the Chaldean bishops wanted to say, well, we want to actually get more vernacular where we are for people to understand it in a deeper way. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but it wouldn't really make a lot of sense if you're doing this for so long. People would learn it, right? You'd hope. The Byzantine, the Ukrainian, right? They're all Ukrainian. That's just because from the founding of that church, that's what they've always done. So the Latin Rite, though, is a particular rite of what we call the Western Church. It was celebrated in Rome for since the founding of that see, when Peter took over the see, and so it would have been celebrated in Latin because, well, Rome spoke Latin, right? That's kind of how these all come about, In Capernaum, they were speaking Aramaic. So they were celebrating Mass in Aramaic. So in the very beginning of the church, a lot of these places were celebrated in vernacular, which is why we have these different rites that came from it, right? The structure is still the same, right? You always have the liturgy of the word, the Eucharist is all based on the temple worship, the synagogue worship of the Jewish faith. That's where it comes from. And so there's always that structure regardless of whatever language it's in. So for the first, 1900 years of the Roman Rite, it was always celebrating Latin. Now, what Dr. Sanquicillian did said, well, the Latin Rite is so present throughout the world, right? And because we're developing this, was really a new way of celebrating the Mass, but in reality, it was actually going back to an ancient way of doing it. A lot of people believe that the Novus Ordo that we have today actually is a recreation of what was done in the house churches of the first couple centuries. And even some would go farther to say that this would have been the papal Mass, maybe in the 5th or 4th century. So maybe, whatever. But still, the structure still remains. If you heard the extraordinary form of the Tridentine, which came out of the Council of Trent in the 1500s, the structure is still there. You still see it there. But what the allowance from the council said was, because we have this new way of doing it, well, we're going to allow for people to actually say it in the vernacular so they can learn it, right? But everywhere in the document always says Latin takes pride of place. Latin is the mother tongue of the church. And even in that same line where it allows vernacular, it really clarifies this is for teaching purposes with the intention to go back to Latin once everyone actually learns it. So we get in this kind of catch-22 now where it's like, okay, well, since the vernacular is being used in the Mass, we stop teaching Latin. And why do we stop teaching Latin? Well, because nobody's using it anymore. Why is nobody using it anymore? We're not using the Mass anymore. Why? So you have this kind of chicken or egg goes all the way back in circular logic to where now we're not teaching Latin. And so we're just been doing it in the vernacular for the last 60 years, right? So that causes a lot of confusion and consternation because I think most people are just like, yeah, we can do it in our own language. Great. Yeah, you can. Yeah, no one said you can't. But then we're supposed to, once we start learning how this goes, which I don't know, most people, I kind of learned how the Mass went after about the age of, 8. So, but now, now we're just kind of like, let's learn this Latin so we can actually go back to what the original intention was. But nobody taught it. And so now we're stuck in kind of this generational time warp where it's like, well, we're not teaching this language to anybody, and therefore we shouldn't, because we're trying to, you could make the argument too, well, people are still trying to learn, especially our catechumens, our candidates, or little children. It's like, okay, well, is there a way we can actually do that, right? I mean, for instance, maybe pastorally speaking, why not have one Mass or maybe 2, I don't know, in the vernacular, or maybe let's say even 3 Masses in the vernacular and 2 Masses in Latin on Sunday. Would that be such a earth shaker, right? It would be that's really going back to the original intent of what Sanquicillian wanted, and then allows people to learn it in the vernacular and then come to the Latin side and start learning it in that respect. I mean,
for many of the old people, like me, I was brought up with the Latin, so I
and it's interesting that a lot of the pushback, it comes from particular generations, and it seems like the older crowd is actually really good with it, right? Because they're it's almost kind of nostalgic in some ways. The younger crowd, I think there's more of a mystery surrounding it, so they wouldn't mind learning it. And you have this kind of middle generation that maybe I don't know if they were around. I mean, either right after the council, around the council, were just completely militant against it. And I don't quite understand that. I mean, again, I don't know what the times were like back then, where things were changing like that. And I understand the confusion that probably could have brought, and I can't even understand the frustration of okay, well, back in 2011, where the translation changed. Now, even recently, we had another translation change. It's I get the frustration because it's sort of well, okay, I have to come on top of it. It's hard once you learn a certain way, and then you go. I get it. I do understand that. And I think we can do both, right? I don't know. It was very kind of shocking to me when there was a survey sent out back in December, and it was shocking to me the negative comments and the negative kind of responses that were being given just because the Latin would be introduced. And this wasn't even like, complete Latin. It was just like, why not do just like the closing rites or something? It was just like, whoa. It was really interesting. And I get it, but also it's just like, I think sometimes we can overact on certain things.
Is this like from the first survey, because St. Gabriel sent out, I guess, kind of a preliminary?
This was before all that. So there was a survey sent out to gauge an interest in the Rate Caeli Mass. They were going to be doing this December. So in case anyone wonders, December 16th at 7 p.m. here at church, we actually are celebrating a Rate Caeli Mass, which is a Novus Ordo Mass. It's the current rite that's celebrated in Latin. The readings will be in English. The homily might be in English. We'll figure that out. And everything else is in Latin. And it's also, the other beautiful thing about it is actually it's done completely by candlelight. So it actually goes back to an old monastic tradition where there would be a votive mass to Our Lady that was done during sometime in Advent, usually within what they call the novena of Advent. So between like December 16th through the 25th. And it would be done actually really early in the morning. So the idea would be that the mass is lit by candlelight and it would end as the sun is rising, right? So that the sun would then flood the sanctuary by the consecration. It's kind of changed tradition where it become more an evening thing. So really the sun would be going down and then candlelights would take over, representing the light of Christ. Either one's it can do, and so we're doing the more evening option. We were talking about maybe doing the morning option, but we thought we'd get more people coming for the evening. Probably true, but that's going to be this Advent. So more information will be coming for that. But we've been training people. I don't know if people looking online on YouTube and Facebook. We've been posting our Latin classes, and we're just kind of going through the Mass, trying to get our pronunciations, trying to kind of get our flow, so that we can actually participate at the Mass in Latin. So I've also been dedicating time that when I don't have a parish Mass here at St. Gabriel, so about every 3 weeks we go through a schedule change where one of us doesn't have a Mass scheduled for the week, a daily Mass. And so one of those Masses I've talked with the group that we're planning, and I'm planning to have a Latin Mass at those Masses at noon. So I'll put those out as we get closer to those dates. Problem this week is I'm taking over for Monsignor Simon, so I have 8 o'clock Mass this week. The Monsignor Schemmelfer leaves next week, so I got the 6th and the 8th, so I don't have another week off until I think it's second week of August. So that week we'll probably look to do a Latin Mass sometime during the week, and I'll let everyone know when that would be. But last time I did it was for the Mass of the Sacred Heart, Sunday Sacred Heart, and we had about, I'd say, 30 people come, which was great. And I mean, I think all it's going to do is just grow. So, and again, it's the older people and it's the younger people, and good, fine.
Yeah.
So we'll keep everyone abreast of what's happening with that. But yeah, it's interesting. The whole vernacular thing is such a. To me, it's kind of divisive, but I think also that shows that people don't actually. A lot of people never actually read the documents that came from Vatican II. I understand there's a spirit of Vatican II because I know I've lived in it. I understand where that came from, and it wasn't until I actually at the seminary until I realized a lot of stuff that we do in liturgy, there's really no basis for it. Even the I don't think we talked about this in other places too, but the bringing out of the altar away from the tabernacle. There's really nothing out there that says, yeah, you can do that. It's alluded to in some places, but there's really no authentic, authoritative document that says, yeah, you should actually build it that way. And so we may ask, why does that happen? Well, leading up to the council, there were some innovations being done. There were some ways of doing things that kind of like we bring the council and kind of debate, talk about. And there was a lot of experimentation, which is also why you had what maybe you called clown masses, and people have heard of masses being done with pizza and soda. Yeah, and so it's one of these. I mean, more appeal to children, to kids and teens. And I mean, we can look back now and say, yeah, those are completely illicit. They should never have been done, invalid even for the parts of the Eucharist, but especially with pizza and soda. But I think there was a scientific way, maybe, I don't know, for lack of a better term, to try and see what was working and what wasn't. And I don't necessarily blame anyone for trying it, but then I think the problem is that that kind of spirit has persisted to where, well, what's the big deal about how my gestures at Mass, or what does it really mean to participate actively in the Mass, right? I think that understanding is completely blurred in the minds of most people. That we think that just because we say the words and do the gestures and that's all we're really called to do, and that's not what the documents actually say. Yeah, it's an internal disposition towards what's going on, right? A reception in a way of what's happening, rather than I have to be active in it. And that's, I think, that was one of the critiques against the extraordinary form when this revision came, was because, well, people were coming in and just saying their rosary during the Mass. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the thing is, if you're not actually paying attention to what's actually happening,
Right.
that's not an actual active participation in the Mass. And rightly so, there should have been some reform to say, how can we do this better so people actually understand what's going on and also be able to participate better in it. And I think that's what documents all talk about and what's been directed to, but it's taken a different type of mannerisms and form and away from what the original intention was. And that's unfortunate, I think. Good. Okay. Well, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
We'll have something to post at least. That's good news. Everybody have a good night. We'll see you all next week.